I want to welcome everybody who joined us today. We have a large group from around the world, actually, who joined us. Good morning, good afternoon to you. I'm Professor Tamer Çavuşgil at Georgia State University. We welcome you to this ongoing series of webinars we started in April, since April 2020. Last year, and since then we've ran some 50 plus webinars on teaching, research, and careers. And today is another special one, more like a conversation with some of the most distinguished names in international business. I want to say that this series of webinars is a joint effort of a consortium of CIBERs. You've seen the other 9 universities, 9 CIBERs in the slides that ran previously. These represent the MSI consortium of CIBERs. CIBERs, of course, are nationally recognized centers of excellence in international business with the mission of internationalizing curriculum in business schools, business faculty, and reaching students through various internationalization efforts such as study abroad programs. So this session, of course, just like the others, is just about an hour long, and it will be recorded. And those who joined us today will receive an email later on. If you'd like to review the recording again or like to share it with your colleagues, you will be able to do that. When you do exit the program at the end of 1 hour, there will be a short survey. We would like you to respond. Please do 5 short questions, and then you will receive any handouts that may be available from the speakers as well. So in the webinar, everyone except the panelists, the speakers who joined us today, is muted in the webinar. There will be a question and answer opportunity at the end. We'll leave about 10-15 minutes for your comments, reflections, questions. Please do record them, upload them to Q&A icon. And if you need assistance from our good colleagues here, Paula Huntley or Rebecca Brown, please use the chat function, chat icon to post your question. So with that, I would like to introduce my very special guest today. Really 3 distinguished names in business and international business, scholars, mentors, program builders, consultants. They've done everything. And I apologize to you in advance, Jag, Saeed, and Kostas, because I will not even begin to provide an introduction because it would be very incomplete. But I think everybody who joined us today knows something about your background, your continued contributions to the field of international business and development of a lot of young people as well. So what I've done, I've prepared some questions that I will ask to these colleagues. And let me say, Jag and Saeed and Kostas, welcome to this program. I will direct some questions and then we'll take turns to respond to them. And the first question is really a very natural one for this group, very appropriate one for this group, which is simply what keeps you going? Because it's remarkable that you've been productive and impactful over a long period of time. Obviously, you know, my age shows here, but you are all close to me as well, I think. We have some young ones here as well. But it's been impressive to follow your careers over several decades, and your productivity and impact in academia, in business, in administration has been unbelievable. So let me just give you a start with that before you respond, and I'll ask Jack first and then Costa and Saeed next. But when I think about my own career, I really think I reflected this morning. I said, well, I'm so grateful to Professor Warren Bilkey. Warren Bilke was my advisor at the University of Wisconsin, PhD advisor. What he did, I mean, when I was in the doctoral program there, every time he went to meet with the company, with some business executives, or he attended a business function, he took some of us, one or two doctoral students along with him. And when I got started with my dissertation research and started interacting with business people, he actually accompanied me for these interviews, hour and a half long interviews, and I watched them and I learned so much from him. The bottom line is that he whetted the appetite for staying close to business. After all, international business is an applied field, and we need to remain very close to business, have a good ear for what happens in terms of the business world, business phenomena. And I think that gave me the opportunity to pick up important topics for research, to learn about mega trends that were brewing, major events, macro events that were brewing, and perhaps stay a little bit ahead of the pack in terms of pioneering some research. I'm thinking about our early work when I was a doctoral student and Professor Bilke's impact. We studied exporting by small and medium-sized companies because folks at Harvard, Vernon and his disciples, were studying the multinationals. And some of us asked, well, what about the rest of the world? Many medium-sized and small firms, they are also international. So let's try to investigate them in a formal, systematic manner. So we got out and we did a lot of research on exporting behavior. Then we moved on to understanding the internationalization process, because starting with a smaller company gives you the understanding of the evolution of how that internationalization process starts. Then we picked up on the born global trend before anybody else started talking about these young entrepreneurial firms that went international fairly early, almost after inception. We looked at multinational coordination activities and multinationals. We studied the emerging markets when JAG started, and then maybe after JAG started, when emerging markets was a new phenomenon, and there wasn't much written on it. Anyway, I think this staying to the business phenomena, staying close to business people, and that may mean informal interactions. It may mean attending some of their events. It may mean staying in touch with publications that reflect the business phenomena, such as the consulting world. McKinsey and many other consulting companies publish beautiful white papers and reports and websites. So anyway, I think that is my secret anyway, in terms of productivity and impact over the years. But Jag, let me turn to you first and hear your reactions to that. What kept you going all over these years? You still have many more years to go. I know, many more decades.
Sure. No, thank you, Tamer, for that question. And greetings to my colleagues. We are all good friends. We appreciate and admire each other. In my case, I think if there is one underlying factor, it is passion to learn. Never declare yourself as an expert on anything, because the world is so dynamic and changing. So even in the same field or a subfield, you can continuously update, learn, etc. I was trained very broadly. My undergraduate was history, statistics, and accounting. Originally, my plan was to become a chartered accountant, or a CPA, as they call it in the Western world. But it didn't work out that way for a bunch of reasons. So I came to the US to do my MBA in production management. Think about that. And I did that thing, but I got turned on by psychology and behavioral sciences. And there were so many people who influenced me. So this eclecticism is very key. The most influential subject on my own upbringing has been history. And once you get the addiction for history, you are a lifelong learner, because history is always created. There's always the archival material, etc. And I find two processes that keeps me going. One is that best way to learn is to teach. So for example, I started teaching a doctoral seminar on marketing theory at Illinois when my department had passed away, and he used to teach the class. So they said, can you do it? And I had a passion to learn theory because I had done the Harvard Set theory. I wanted to go more into the marketing area. And that led me to the whole new book and learning. And we are revising the book after 30 years or something. I think that's very key, that you have a passion to learn. The best way to learn is to teach. Second major lesson I've learned is that if the student is ready, the teacher shows up. I think your own aptitude to learn, and you can learn from anybody. You can learn from your students. In fact, sometimes they're better articulate people if you take a passion into what they want to do research, as opposed to saying, here is my research, join the team kind of a notion. So I always encourage my students to think independent of me. And if they like something, I get excited, then we work together, almost co-creation. That has kept me going at the same time. I personally believe that all of us should be, because we are educators, we are not just scientists, like working in a Bell Labs or IBM Labs or General Motors Tech Center in Warren, Michigan, where I've been heavily advisor, because there you have a very narrow and you continue doing the same thing. We are educators. As educators, we have a responsibility to unlock the potential of others. And that is done by teaching. I mean, you see comments made by students, doctoral students, undergraduates, whoever you teach, after many years saying that, you know, you turned me around. You did something that you don't even know you're aware. It's a very noble cause that you are dealing with. How do you unlock the potential of others? That keeps you going. And of course, you mentor them outside the classroom teaching or impact of your research. I think that's very important. So we should be actually, as academics, what I call deep generalists. Yes, we are labeled as experts in international business, international marketing, consumer behavior, cross-cultural, whatever it turns out to be, but we can relate to all other things and we know how to connect the data from this discipline or a sub-discipline to another discipline, sub-discipline, and somehow connecting the dots creates an excitement and aha, because it was there, but you never saw it before. It's like an experiment in a laboratory, you know, chemistry, something you mix and something comes about. I think that excitement and obsession to learn keeps me going.
Mhm. Excellent. Wonderful insights and wonderful guidance for young people as well. Costa, let me turn to you next, and then Said after that. Your
Thank you.
reflections.
Thank you. Like Tamer and Jag suggested, I have always made an effort to work on timely problems and issues of particular managerial relevance, as well as theoretically interesting and value enhancing, to be able to keep things going in a positive manner and renew myself. First of all, I have paid attention to engaging with the business world through executive development programs and workshops, which enable me to understand their current problems and how they think and operate. This constitutes valuable input for our research activities. Second, I have always been supervising a number of doctoral students. I learn, like everybody else, from good doctoral students. I work closely with them, and this close collaboration often results in good publications in scholarly academic journals. In addition, I have been engaging with the academic community as an organizer of conferences, also as an active participant in other events. And these where I have met many leading scholars in IB and international marketing. Conferences like the AIB and AMA winter and summer meetings have been instrumental to my keeping abreast of the times and being connected to our peers and many other people in our field. I mean, My active involvement in such academic activities resulted in highly impactful papers in leading journals, not only in IB, but also in other fields, which is very important nowadays. In sum, this ongoing interaction with both the business world and the academic community, along with my passion for doctoral students, has kept my productivity up, I would say. I still enjoy my work with some senior colleagues, but also with younger upcoming scholars, as it helps me keep going and continue to contribute to knowledge in other areas.
Very wise advice. Thank you so much, Costa. I mean, people talk about their publications, and I know some people look at Google citations and all that. I don't look at that. I actually am most proud of in my own career is the number of people I've touched, especially through the doctoral program, the number of people I mentored. And then when I look at them, I sometimes discover that I'm an intellectual grandfather to many of them. But I think that's the benchmark for me, and that's so wise. Saeed, obviously you've been a steady contributor, solid colleague, and sustained contributions all over the years. So what is your secret? What kept you going?
Yes.
Well, again, thank you very much, Tamer. I see a lot of common threads between what I've heard and what my experience has been. I think for me, it is very much a sense of curiosity, an ongoing sense of curiosity to just understand the world a little better and from perhaps a different angle. This feeling of contributing to the existing knowledge and perhaps adding some new knowledge base. That's less frequent, of course. Oftentimes we gravitate around areas that are a bit more familiar. It takes a lot more innovation to engage in creating new knowledge. But I also have added that to a dash of contrarianism. This is something that you read or you encounter that doesn't seem quite right to you. And you may be wrong, but you investigate it and to see if there is anything that you can contribute to sort of set the record straight. And so that helps in helping the productivity component. But let me backtrack and add a couple of items that we have already heard spoken about. One is the influence of a role model. You know, I was at Ohio State and people were very active in publications at the time and since then. I had an international business advisor, Dave Ricks, who's since retired and lives in Europe. But he encouraged me to do some work with him, and I picked up the pieces and I did a paper, and that paper eventually got published in GIBS at the time and eventually found its way into a part of a larger volume in a book. And so that role model was influential, but as many of you know, international business did not play a big role at Ohio State, and it's bigger now than it was when I was there. So my most influential role model, which was heavily influential from my perspective, was John Ryans, the late John Ryans, who really took me under his wings and did exactly what the Warren Bilkey did with the doctoral students at Wisconsin. He took me around to businesses, introduced me to various people, and really he was instrumental in encouraging me to get to know the environment. Northern Ohio, where we were situated, is heavily industrial, and there are a lot of manufacturing facility companies, and so that got me engaged over there, and that really helped. Another influence that sort of promotes my and continues my productivity is colleagues, people that I meet at AIB and AMA and AMS, Academy of Marketing Science, and these interactions with these individuals also promotes greater thinking about research and contributing to knowledge. So that's been influential to me. And I continue to work, and I have really not all, but most institutions that I've been at, in terms of working with local colleagues that we share a common interest in a topic. And we have been doing work here at Tulsa and South Carolina and so on. And of course, with John Ryans at Kent State. So we do that, and that's been heavily influential. So those are the main influences that have kept me going over the years.
Excellent, excellent, wonderful. Thank you so much, Saeed. Let me turn to another related question, actually, that relates to professional agenda. And more than I think any of us, Jag, your work and impact has cut across so many different contexts. I mean, teaching, research, program building, institution building, mentoring, executive education, advising major companies around the world, philanthropy, and more. I think in my own case, I find synergy between, let's say, teaching and research. I mean, they go, unlike some people say, they go very much hand in hand. I get my inspiration for teaching from practice, from research, and vice versa. They are so complementary. They provide such a huge synergy. And then I push myself, I found myself in positions where I could play a role, being perhaps a small scale mover and shaker in terms of curriculum development or programmatic leadership, certainly getting involved in the world of grants, provided the opportunities for funding various projects, bringing doctoral students together. So there's a lot of synergy in these professional agenda, but you've done it all. I mean, Jack, more than anybody, administrative leadership including. So what is the secret to that?
I think there is no real secret. Sometimes it's the circumstances that pushes you in a given direction. My being in the administration happened because of the turmoil and the change at University of Illinois, and we had to rebuild the whole department. And again, you take the attitude, you can learn from others, you can learn from your own experiences. And so long as you are learning constantly and provide leadership, so that's very valuable experience. Sitting at the university committee level, which is puts you at a higher abstract level. So you understand across disciplines, such as, for example, law versus business versus theology versus science. So that gives you a very much different perspective as opposed to being in the business school alone and business school ecosystem. That always has been very valuable. But I'll follow Saeed and you and Kostas. I also had a great mentor, I must tell you, especially in the US. And that was John Howard. And John Howard actually believed very strongly in working with industry. He was an economist, wanting to study behavioral sciences, was evolving this theory about why people become loyal, while economic theories were talking about you make choices, compare the attributes, more of this, less of that, trade-offs. He believed actually it's more about learning. You reduce choices rather than you make choices. That was a fundamental change in the way you think paradigm. And then he was very active. So he would, again, like your case, Tamer, take me to companies. I remember when we went to Columbia together from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh itself, we did a lot of work with the steel mill companies. US Steel was there, Bethlehem was there. I don't know, all the typical 3-4 big steel companies. And we did research about how people buy steel in a company, or how people buy components to make steel, or what do they do, and learned quite a lot in terms of personal interviews. And so John was absolutely incredible, almost very passionate to learn again. So he did not divide his time between different things, but that was very powerful influence. And I got into the industry actually by teaching workshops. So sometimes it's like an academic entrepreneurship by necessity. I needed extra income. My wife had decided to be a homemaker. We had children. Academic salary was not enough. So I said, all right, I need to earn extra income by teaching a workshop on multivariate statistics. which
I
was a
remember
growing
that.
field. Yes.
I remember that.
And I took Paul Green to come and help me after 2 days, half a day, because Paul Green loved multidimensional scaling and clustering, for example. Conjoint was coming. I didn't believe in those techniques because I'm more like a statistician rather than a heuristic person. So I said, Paul, can you help me? And we must have traveled all over the world. In Europe, we must have spent weeks after weeks in Scandinavia or in Netherlands or wherever possible. And that one was a great learning experience because you meet managers with their problems, etc. And that's how I got into AT&T, into many companies through executive education. And it turns out to be, gives you another perspective altogether. And that was clearly the factor behind.
Mhm.
I think ultimately when you analyze yourself and say, what makes you tick? It turns out to basically, again, the point I made, how do you unlock other people's potential? How do you make ordinary people extraordinary? We are all in the business. So I've always taken the analog that if you take a grain of wheat and make it into a loaf of bread, an agricultural commodity, the value add is only 3 times. Cost of raw material is that high. If you take a rough diamond and polish it, a good diamond cutter will increase the value to a finished marketable diamond to about 15 to 20 times. But if you take a human being, mentor, polish, educate, the value add is infinite. It actually contributes to the society, not just to the individual, in a way that you would have never imagined. So it almost becomes like a mission in some fashion, you know. As an educator, we are driven by our mission, not just livelihood or by the boss.
Mhm.
Our bosses I don't tolerate, unfortunately, which is why I did not go into the industry world, you know. So given the autonomy and the freedom. I do want to add one more thing, which I would very be important. I think we need to learn to give back to the society as much as society gives to us, which is where the philanthropy came.
Mhm.
I'm a refugee from Burma, or Myanmar as it is called, before World War II, when Japan was rolling over all of Asia to come to India, which was the final destination as a largest, very good resource-based nation, and wanted to take that market away from the British. So they rolled over Burma and we became refugees, lost everything. If you survive a crisis, you actually have an inner strength. Nothing matters to you except your own conviction. I think that's very important among our academic colleagues. Do you have your own conviction of what you want to do? Do you want to be a contrarian if necessary? Do you want to create something new, etc.? And I think that has been very helpful to me. And I remember how survival can be so difficult for human beings. So how can you contribute to others? And that is why we started the foundations, pretty much my wife and I. And I tell you, the most meaningful thing we do is to give back to the society, however we can do it. So that's really my background about
That's
why am I into so many different things.
obviously most admirable, most noble, and we know your generosity all over these years, Jack,
Thank
and
you.
it's just amazing to watch that. Costa, you obviously had your hand in many aspects of professional agenda as well. Program leadership, building new programs, mentoring people, curriculum issues. I mean, so what kept you going in terms of the diversity of your professional agenda?
What I would like to suggest to young scholars is that you should have passion for your work and derive satisfaction from your contribution, knowledge, learning and teaching, and pedagogy in general, and service internally and externally. To make achievements across various fronts in academia, it is vitally important to work within a positive working environment, enabling people to make valued contributions, different areas, and also to grow and develop. For instance, if you work for a school that provides little or no support for research, or if the leaders of your institution do not appreciate scholarship, it will be difficult for faculty to produce scholarly research and build an enduring record of publications. I always remember my first dean at my current institution, who encouraged me to go out to undertake executive education and deliver in-house workshops for major organizations. He believed that involvement in executive education is beneficial not only for academics, but also for the business school. Academics with good experiences from the business world can always help the school enrich its programs and introduce new programs tailored to the requirements of senior executives, and in this way, enhancing the school's reputation within the highly influential business community. In sum, the institutional environment, together with personal drive capability, constitutes a key success factor in helping faculty engage effectively in various important academic activities and make contributions not only in research and teaching, but also in broader areas by serving the academic and business communities.
Excellent, excellent, good advice. I'll tie that into our next topic question, and maybe Saeed, you can get us started. Advice for young colleagues, because some of it came out already. I mean, reflecting on your own career, what kind of suggestion would you offer to early career researchers? I think we have quite a few of them in our audience here today, and I think they are enjoying what they are hearing so far. Saeed.
Thank you, Tomer. I think the main advice that I would have for young scholars is not to lose your sense of purpose in the profession. I think we are in public service, and we try to help students and our colleagues advance the base of knowledge. And so the idea is not to lose your momentum in going forward. And so you have to keep yourself motivated and continue to do your work. And that, you know, in my case, I've been in situations where, as I think Kostas was hinting at this, that the resources might be stretched in terms of research at the institution. But I think even in those conditions, there are always situations where you can, find synergy with either local folks or students or other faculty elsewhere, and strike a project and move forward with that. And I think the idea is that, when you're at a school where research and publication is not the top priority, or heavy emphasis is not placed on it, that, at least for me, I benchmark people that I admire in the profession. I still do that. I look up to people that are doing great work and on a regular basis, and I try to sort of find situations where I can participate in that situation as well. So I think that even with the heavy teaching load or administrative duties, there is always a chance to pursue research on this, in addition to that. And again, I think my advice, really the overarching advice, is not to lose your momentum and don't give it up, because I think it's a lot more difficult to get back into it. I think just this continuity really has helped me, at least. And I think if I've had administrative duties, actually my first job here at the University of Tulsa was to head the International Management Center, and that was ongoing probably close to 10 years in different forms. And that really consumed a lot of time. There's no question about that. I think everyone around in this webinar has been in that situation, and maybe even more engaging at the administrative side than I have. But even then, I found time to continue to be productive, both in terms of teaching side and definitely on the research side.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And that curiosity that you mentioned, that keeps us going, doesn't it? I mean, being curious about things around us, the phenomena around us, and asking questions. Why do these things happen? What's the relationship between this and that? So that will be, I think, a good transition perhaps to our next topic, which is, instead of looking back a little bit, let's look forward. What's ahead for especially scholars, young scholars, in terms of research directions? Obviously, let me get started with that, and I'll turn to Jag and my colleagues here. I'll provide a checklist first. Obviously, we live in a post-pandemic era, so we've seen a major disruption, and we'll probably see more of this, more of uncertainty, more disruptions, and more unsettled environments. So I think one of the ways in which we can turn this into a research agenda is to ask ourselves, how do we build more resilient organizations? How do companies, local, international, multinational, become more systematically ready to take on vulnerabilities, disruptions in the environment? What is considered excessive or intolerable risk? What kind of risk can they tolerate? How do they develop early warning systems? A good example of this, being ready and being resilient, is of course in the area of supply chain. So we've seen this past model of focus on global sourcing, single sourcing, and supply chain optimization to minimize costs, reduce inventories, boost asset utilization, really has not served us well in this environment. So in this new decoupled global economy, we find ourselves to be much more vulnerable. So we see now companies moving away from just-in-time to just-in-case type of supply chain management, trying to shorten, simplify their supply chains, and so on. So there's a lot of research along those lines: resilience of the organization and resilience in the supply chain. I've seen, for example, Harley-Davidson, a Wisconsin company, recently announcing a Rewire Playbook program, which lowers production volumes in reaction to the reduced demand, and also eliminating models. By simplifying, they're trying to sharpen their focus on products that really matter most to clients, rather than having a broad portfolio of products. So lots of issues there with respect to resilience and being prepared and ready and having visibility into the supply chain so that you do not get surprised. I think also another timely topic is digital startups, which Jack has done some good work on that, but I think we need to understand these web-based enterprises better, their evolution, what happens to them over time, because we see also not just high entry into the digital platform business, but also high exit as well, a lot of failures. So what happens, what is unique to the survivors in this area? I think the skills gap is another issue, because what we keep hearing from the business people, they're still, this is so disappointing to a business educator, right? What they're telling us, I'm sure Jag cannot stop himself from commenting on this. We keep hearing they're not ready for us. They don't have the kind of skills, whether it's fundamental skills like communication, analytical, or lifelong employability skills. So we're having to do upskilling, reskilling, they keep saying to us. I think that's something. There was an interesting survey that was done recently, I think by BCG, Boston Consulting, which also indicated something interesting. They find now in this new generation much less willingness to relocate abroad, overseas for work. That is, obviously, this is part of the pandemic, the concern, the safety, etc. But if this continues beyond the pandemic, it's going to be a big problem. For example, for the multinational, it means, how do you build foreign partnerships? How do you build relationships, which are very important in international business? If you have conflicts with your dealers, distributors, agents, partners abroad, can you really do this conflict resolution, dispute resolution online, or do you need to go travel, shake hands? And how do you develop, how do you transfer knowledge? In the multinational system, you need to be able to communicate this tacit knowledge to your employees around the world. So how effectively can you do that with just a Zoom and other technological means? So and there's societal expectations from business. I think, Jag, you refer to this as even back to the business also. It's very important. Social accountability and so on. The kind of discussion that we heard from Neville Isdell, you remember, Jag, capitalism, Paul Polman, Unilever CEO, who's been promoting conscious capitalism, and you wrote on this. You wrote a lot on this topic as well. By the way, the books that you see behind Jag on the bookshelf are all his books. And Jag, you're a prolific. One of the things we most admire about you, your ability to see through the fog and articulate complex business phenomena in very understandable terms. You have a knack for that, obviously. And congratulations on your most recent publication, which is the Global Rule of Three. But Jack, what kind of advice in terms of research direction for scholars that you would offer?
I think at a very broad level, there are about 4 different trends. If one can extrapolate into the future and say, what's a missing research link? Practice may be struggling with that or actually having solutions, but there's no scientific inquiry behind that one. Like the pandemic, for example. We are now studying very much the impact of pandemic on society, on consumption, on supply chain and everything. The first and the biggest one, I think, is technology. Technology is impacting universally both the enterprises and the individuals at the same time, no matter who you are. And there are 2 components of the technology, and one can summarize. One, of course, is the e-commerce and market exchanges, where international business becomes very important because the players, if not competitors, are not all from one country. So you have the Alibaba in commerce ahead of everybody else, but then you have the Amazon, for example. And even in an emerging economy like India, you have a Flipkart, which is owned by Walmart now. How do you understand that whole ecosystem? So first one is clearly e-commerce as what I would recommend that we think is that basically physical first that we did, brick and mortar, is now becoming digital first. Everything we do, essentially. If there's a simple concept like that, suddenly says, aha, now I can understand the phenomenon. I am more intrigued about the impact of social media on a global basis. Think about the largest nation is 1.4 billion, China. India is 1.3 billion, they're about the same size. But even a bigger nation that has emerged in the last 25 years that we have never understood, its power of jurisdiction, influence, everything, like any nation would have, is what I call Facebook nation, or WhatsApp nation, or Instagram nation, truly global enterprise. Who governs that? There is no jurisdiction by any one country, for example. And how do you manage a 2 billion population who are all citizens of Facebook nation? They have something in common. How do you govern that? Who governs them? Becomes very key issue, bordering both on the policy side as well as on the enterprise side, the private sector, for example. So that's very key, in my view. We have not understood the impact of social media, not just in our personal lives, but in the enterprise arena, which is what we study, international business. And of course, it is much more prevalent, surprisingly, in a B2B market than a B2C market. While we think about social media in a B2B, actually it is impacting, B2C is impacting B2B. So that's clearly one. I will go on with 2 or 3 additional ones, then my colleagues are there, they need to comment. The second one is changing demographics. All advanced countries are aging and aging very rapidly. And as China is becoming middle income, it is already starting to age now. It will be the biggest aging nation surpassing even Japan. So what happens when a society is aging? What are the needs and wants that shift? And are companies preparing for the future needs and wants, or are they still continuing to serve current needs and wants? So you worry about health preservation, wealth preservation becomes larger components of GDP of a nation, which is interesting again. So to me, that whole area of changing demographics, which is just aging, is one component. I studied 5 components. And here is something that we may not know. More and more people are opting to live alone by choice. Isn't that interesting? By 2030, US will have about 33% of the households will be single person households whose companion would be a pet. And may not be like a dog or a cat, but would be a robot as a pet. Interesting, that's the world we are evolving. And the largest nation of people living alone will not be America as we think, but will be French people, France, which surprises to me. Lowest birth rate is in Spain, 1.2, 1.3 children per woman, followed by Italy. Here are Catholic countries. So first thing, as Saeed mentioned, a lot of our knowledge has become obsolete. So I've learned that the half-life of knowledge is declining so sharply that even in our MBA programs, 2 years, by the time the student graduates, half knowledge of what they learned is not as relevant. So how do you constantly become a student contextualizing newer things? Demographic is a very key, powerful tool. The third area, very important one, is that there is a clear message given by the stakeholders of the society, not just policymakers, that sustainability is a serious problem. Or United Nations New Millennium Goals, triple bottom line, taking care of the profit, but also the planet, as well as, in fact, the people. I think that's a very important one, and I'm quite pleased that more and more capital markets are insisting through ESG, environmental, social, and obviously, governance, is the capital that is gaining more and more popularity. So if you want me to invest in your company, you have to show what are you doing for the environment. And some of the leading companies, surprisingly, are not manufacturers who should be leading, but the retailers. Walmart has a process for all suppliers, and they're screening carbon neutral, essentially. So if you want to be a supplier to Walmart on a worldwide basis, show us the plan as to how you'll be carbon neutral. That puts enormous pressure on electricity companies because Walmart is a major consumer of power. It puts enormous pressure on companies like RJ Reynolds, for example, or aluminum people who use enormous energy to produce aluminum, for example. It's mind-boggling. So I think that kind of awakening that has taken place. And I just wrote an article out of sheer frustration that business of business is more than business. Despite Milton Friedman argument, etc., the Chicago School, it is not just the shareholder value, it has to create value for the society at large also. And I think that message is resonating. I will stop here, this goes on. My excitement is that I wish I was 25 years old back again. There's so much out there to do research, which is not the case, but I'm still getting excited, yes.
Fascinating and so true. I mean, there's so many more questions to ask, fundamental, right. Like the ones you just raised, so critical to our society, to our well-being of societies. Yeah. Saeed, I mean, you also, I mean, turning to research and perhaps a research model for young scholars, perhaps suggestions for an optimum. Is there such an optimal mix in terms of research to follow? If you can unmute yourself and give us some insights on that, then I'll turn to Costa. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Yeah.
I think in terms of optimum research, I think it's optimum it's contextually optimal by individuals. I fully endorse a lot of the things that have been said. I think that one of the areas that I would definitely advise my students to look into is to really follow what I consider agile companies, the cutting edge companies in terms of how they manage over the decades and how they're always ahead of their time. The term global really didn't come into common use until perhaps the late 80s or early 90s, 1990s. But IBM was well ahead of the curve by about a decade. So whether or not they are at that point now in terms of being a cutting edge, I would argue that they probably still are. But observing how these companies manage themselves internationally, I think there's a lot to be learned from that, and I think research can emerge from that. And I think just endorsing a couple things a lot of things that have been already said by you and Jag, I think the whole digital space is here to stay, and I think it's going to influence everything that we do. So research on the digital component of business and marketing internationalization is going to be critical. Just to give you an example of what an open space this is, for the Journal of International Management, we did a special issue on the influence of internet on managing internationally. And we really had to search to find good contributions to that special issue. As it turned out, it worked out really nicely in the end, but it wasn't the volume that we had expected in terms of submissions. So that really is an open space, and we see increasing number of high quality work being published. I think Jag last year contributed a very, very nice piece on borderless media, and I think we really need a lot more contributions to that front. And I sort of not so much related to this. I just want to endorse this idea of that Jag mentioned in terms of by the time you are done with a lecture or with an MBA program, your knowledge is getting outdated. Our challenge is to really develop thinkers rather than people who know content per se, because content is moving so rapidly, and digitization is just really a reflection of that. And so I think that our challenge is to learn along with them, but also to provide a framework for them to be agile in a very dynamic work and social environment.
Unfortunately, our time is running out. We have less than 10 minutes, but I know, Costa, I'll ask you next, but you may also want to reflect on this question from one of our participants, Betty Fang from New York. She says, echoing the challenges to influence the open-mindedness of younger generation, it's getting more difficult, more and more difficult due to the current political and anti-intellectual environment and misinformation on the internet. What will be your recommendations for us being educators to face such challenges, this misinformation, and of course, tendency of the young people to learn or to get their information from the internet? That's dangerous, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Costa, with that, I'll go ahead. You're ready.
Yes. Well, through the internet, we can become familiar with the latest developments and what is going on all over the world. It's a borderless world in that regard. However, at the end of the day, as young researchers, I would like to use that lexicon, we should have a focused area of research. Yeah. Always, personally, I have been interested in international business, international marketing issues, in particular strategy aspects in international marketing. And based on my experiences, what I found the hard way is that some degree of connection among my research projects was important to publish in better and better journals. This is something extremely important that young people should take into consideration. I can think of many examples. My initial work wasn't exported. At a certain time, after many publications, I, with colleagues, decided to review a export performance assessment. And we spent a lot of time and effort, and we used theory-based criteria to do this evaluation. We learned a great deal, but this learning was not wasted. Using this learning from that smaller scale study, we engaged in a much bigger review exercise to assess performance outcomes in marketing, where we had to review 25 times more papers. It was a much bigger job, but our initial learning served as a foundation and motivation as well in order for us to engage in this big project. No, therefore, what I would like to suggest is, I mean, there is no optimum recipe for everyone. I mean, each one of us should find what is best for himself and herself, herself. For me, working on a number of somewhat related projects, which I find exciting and promising, as well as timely, is very meaningful, as I have established good partnerships with colleagues with complementary research skills to effectively deal collectively with the various aspects of the project. Others should develop their own recipes based on what is good for them and fits in well with their situation, academic priorities between teaching and research, and their interests. I mean, this is what I can say for young people nowadays, where everyone is connected with everyone else worldwide.
Mhm. Wise, very wise. Thank you so much. And focus, especially early in one's career, is so important. It's part of building a brand, right? Early in your professional journey, you have to get established in some subfield. You have to be one of the best because you know the evolution of that field, that literature stream. Then you know what next questions to ask, and then you establish a brand before you become more eclectic, like we have become over the years. But in just a couple of seconds here, if I can give you each some final words. Jack, we'll start with you, Saeed, and then Costa. Just some final thoughts. It's been amazingly illuminating, educational for me. But Jack, go ahead and give us some final words of wisdom.
Probably there are 3 words of wisdom rather than 1 word of wisdom. I believe in rule of 3 anyhow. I always have written.
Yes.
The first one is that, as Tamer, you mentioned in the beginning, we are an applied field and take a pride on being an applied field. Which says that learning our context has some unique advantages to the rest of the other disciplines outside of international business. What can sociology learn from us, etc.? If you have that kind of an aspiration, it'll be very important, which says we need to understand our context, which is why I've said that we are not truly a social science as people think, like economics, sociology, political science. We are more a clinical science, like engineering, like medicine. We need to learn how to do hands-on and experiential thing, working with companies or projects. Could be non-profit, such as, for example, CARE or United Way or Habitat for Humanity. These are large multinational corporations, but they are not for profit. Or international agencies. Just as one point I want to make, we need to take a pride in our context and how unique it is, and learning from that by being in that ecosystem. It's a great approach. Second one is a little more personal. I have found that to be productive, there are 3 elements I've used. I learned to compartmentalize my work. And I don't allow transgression from this work, like teaching, into research or research into teaching or service. I think when we come out with compartmentalization, it makes you more productive. Second thing, I used to always prolong till the deadline, and I still have the tendency, and I never achieved the deadline. I learned from Bob Ferber at Illinois, who was a giant in his field, highly respected scholar in marketing. And I said, Bobby, your desk is always clean. You are so busy. He said, I use 5-4 principle, first in, first out. Don't wait for the deadline. I learned that. Move the project, whatever it is, as and when it comes, which has worked very well. Last one is what I've learned. Mainly, do not agonize for the Six Sigma. There is no Six Sigma of life. In other words, you will never have a perfection in any research you do because we are in a muddy water anyhow. There will be unexplained variance. There will be error term from a statistical viewpoint. So be happy if you achieve 90% R square as opposed to 99.9%. 2 standard deviations are enough. Learn to satisfy and enjoy what you created, which is better than no knowledge. And I think that's the third thing I would suggest.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jack. Very wise.
Can I add
Sure.
one more thing? I know,
Sure.
Timur, you're running for time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, today's young scholars have created a stress among themselves by having always this worry about how do I get tenured.
Mhm.
It's a counterintuitive. The more you worry about it, the worse you will perform. Tenure will come along if you just do what you're passionate about. Don't get into clinical depression. 50% of management students go through clinical depression during their doctoral programs. And some of them continue afterwards. That's not what you aspired for. You could have done better in other occupations. You aspired here to contribute back to the society, create your own brand identity, and have that inner strength. Don't let your senior colleagues pressure you to say, publish, so you get tenured. Publish, so you make an impact and a difference in society. It'll energize you in a totally different way. I'm sorry to take a little more time,
No,
but
that
I
was
felt very soon.
very well said. In fact, there was a question from one of my participants on that who gets frustrated in the middle of the PhD program and needed some inspiration to go on. I think you just delivered that. Thank you.
Okay.
Saeed, any final words? If you can unmute yourself also.
Yes, I think a lot of good advice has been advised, has been given already, But I think that, for me, I think that this notion of research really translates into ongoing aspects of intellectual evolution. We are all learning machines, as has been said, I think, over and over in the last hour or so. We learn from everyone and everything around us. And I think this sense of intellectual curiosity really is something that should carry everyone forward. And we have to be motivated to do this. And I would also add that one component of that, and then very important component of that, is how companies function, is the practice of business. And I think looking at them very closely and integrating it into your research, I think this would be a very fruitful outcome, and so it keeps you in touch, it keeps you relevant in terms of what work you're doing. I review, like all of you, a lot of papers, and I about half the time I see that what the work they've done is either weakly connected or unconnected to practice. And I think this is really a huge gap that we need to fill to remain relevant. And I think our constituents are questioning how much contribution we are making. So I think continuing to learn and remaining relevant are probably the two points that I'd like to make.
Very much agree. Very much agree. Thank you, Saeed. Kostas, we'll turn to you for last words.
Some piece of advice for young scholars. I would suggest to them that they should stay focused 100% and pay attention to the amount and quality of the publication. They should undertake research that has impact not only on theory development, but also for business practice and or public policy. I suggest that they should pay focal attention to building research teams with others who have complementary skills. Editors of major journals often note that nowadays publishing in leading journals involves the combined effort of several researchers. Building effective research partnerships is essential. We need to undertake managerially relevant, theoretically interesting research. as well. And at the end of the day, I would like that what we need to pay focal attention to is to conceptual development. Issues such as conceptual clarity, overarching theory-based conceptual story, and hypothesis advanced on the basis of clear conceptual arguments are all ingredients of rigorous conceptual development.
Excellent.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Thank you so much. With that, I'd like to bring this conversation to a conclusion. I want to thank our very special guests here, Jack. Thank you so much, Saeed. Thank you so much, and Costa. Thank you so much. Hope to see you at another webinar. And thanks to all of us who tuned into this conversation from around the world. We had more than 100 people. We will be obviously talking about our future webinars as well. Do stay connected, because there's a short survey we would like you to respond to about future webinars. And in the meantime, we will mute ourselves, and then we'll be able to respond to some of the questions and comments that we have not been able to get to. With that, have a good rest of your day. Thank you again, Jack, Saeed, and Costa.